Right, welcome to my rather low-tech way of trying to talk you through the Whitechapel paper. Well, first of all, describe two features of the policing system in Whitechapel. Well, that's just basic revision. Two examples you could have put. London was divided into different sections with different police divisions in charge, and H Division was in charge of Whitechapel. Autopsy was one form of investigation which the police used to determine clues about a murderer. Another one, police used to check the body temperature of a corpse to try to determine how long it had been dead. So it's just revision, that one. Study sources A and B, though, in the sources booklet. How useful are they? Now, some of you stopped there. Some of you just wrote, how useful are they? But what you're actually being asked is, how useful are they for an inquiry into violent crime in the Whitechapel area? For example, if I asked you, how useful is this dog? The answer would be, well, it's useful for giving you exercise. He's useful for keeping you warm sometimes as he goes and lays up next to you. He's good, definitely good for making you happy. Billy, that you? But in terms of how useful is he at 9 o'clock on a Monday night, the answer is not very. So it very much depends. Oh, now you look, dear. So it very much depends on what you're talking about when it says how useful. How useful for what? How useful is this dog as a chef? Rubbish. Absolutely terrible. How useful is this dog as an exercise aid? Much better. So you've got to look very closely at what is it for an inquiry into violent crime in the Whitechapel area. Well, here is source A, and basically it's a man, John Shoemaker, who's given evidence against James Hunt in court, and he talks about how he's been violently attacked. So that is useful as an example of a violent crime that took place in Whitechapel. It gives you examples of the sorts of things that went on in Whitechapel. What does my own knowledge say? My own knowledge, which a lot of you missed, and you need to put my own knowledge tells me, or history tells us is even a better one. History tells us that this is exactly the sort of thing that was known to happen in Whitechapel at the time. So to a historian, it's a useful example of generally what went on. However, you've got to look at the provenance and the source and think, why might you not trust it? We've talked about our knowledge. What about this? Well, if you're giving evidence against somebody who's basically beating you up, you might exaggerate it because John Shoemaker's not going to be happy about James Hunt, so he might be exaggerating what happened to him to try and get him convicted. Also, it's only one example of a violent crime in Whitechapel. It's not representative of all crime in Whitechapel, although our own knowledge tells us this is the sort of thing that did happen. There's obviously a gang involved, so we know that gangs were a problem in Whitechapel. It's not representative of everything that happened. So there's a bit of our knowledge and a bit of provenance. That's what you needed to have. Some of you had none of that. Some of you just generally assessed it. You must have provenance, you must have own knowledge. What about this? Well done if you spotted that this was a penny dreadful. There's a clue there. And you should know that penny dreadfuls, if we start to think about why you might have a reason to question this source, penny dreadfuls were for entertainment purposes. And so therefore, they might exaggerate the situation, glamorise, glorify it to make it interesting so people pick it up and buy it. So that's what I'll be talking about as a penny dreadful. Drawing is about the murder of a lady by her lover, and he's buried Harriet Lane's body under the floorboards of his workshop. Now, first of all, thinking of my own knowledge, this crime, that doesn't actually sound like the sorts of things that Whitechapel was known for. So I'm thinking of my own knowledge. To a historian, thinking, well, crime was definitely a problem in Whitechapel. Whitechapel was known for the Jack the Ripper murders, but Jack the Ripper probably didn't know his victims other than it just being a prostitute. This is two people who were in a relationship. One of them's buried him under the floorboards. A businessman. This looks like a story that's been selected because it's a good story. This businessman, Wainwright, he was probably well known and wealthy around the area. So it was probably a big scandal when his lover's body was found buried underneath the floorboards of his workshop. So this might not be representative of violent crime generally in Whitechapel, and more of a exciting story to tell the people, which is exactly what Penny Dreadfuls were known for. However, my own knowledge tells me that 6 women were murdered by Jack the Ripper in Whitechapel. So violence against women was a feature of Whitechapel from my own knowledge. So there's a bit of provenance, there's a bit of own knowledge. There we go. You must have provenance, own knowledge, to do a good answer to any how useful question. It's not easy, but you've certainly got to do those sorts of things. Now, if I go back to the question over here, it says, what could you do to follow up source A? Right. Well, I would say so that far as 90% of you talked about the crime. I'm going to go back to my dog analogy. Okay. How could you follow up this to find out more about dogs? That's very different to how could you follow up this to find out more about this dog. Now, what am I talking about here? How would you follow up source A? Some of you stopped there. How would you follow up source A? You've been asked, how would you follow up source A to find out more about violent crime in the Whitechapel area? So saying, well, I would find out more about the other 6 and see what sort of people they were, or anything. You was, like, on so many of your bits of paper, I was writing too specific to this crime. You need to find out about, follow this source up to find out about violence in Whitechapel. So, let's go back to the question. Detailing source A, I would follow up. I would follow up the fact that he was surrounded by 6 attackers. Question I would ask, was it normal for gangs to operate in 1888 in Whitechapel? Type of source I could use. There's only so many types of sources. It's something that we've got to work on. What sort of sources would we select? But tending to be a good one would be, well, I would look at more evidence from more court cases, more evidence from trials, more trial records from the Old Bailey. I would look at newspaper reports, see if there's any more mentions of gangs operating in the area. You know, there's all sorts of options there. Finally, how this source might help me answer my question. Well, if in witness statements in other trials the witnesses talked about being attacked by a number of people, then it's going to confirm whether or not gangs were a big problem in the Whitechapel area when trying to find more about violent crime in the Whitechapel area. So there we go. Revision, own knowledge and provenance. Why is it useful? What is the reason to suggest it might not be 100% accurate or might have limitations? That's a better way of putting it. And this one, not just how would you follow up source A to find out about the crime it happens to mention, how would you follow up source A to find out more about violent crime? It's basically saying, what would you do to find out more about violent crime in the Whitechapel area? And just read your answer. You almost certainly didn't do that, and hopefully you can see that. And we can address that for the real exam. And when you've done all of this, you've got to write yourself a little note. That's the key thing here. A note to yourself in summer. With this fresh in your head, what you're going to write properly in detail. After I've marked all your stuff, I forget some of the things I've asked you to do, unless I write it down. So you must record what have you got to focus on to get better marks in the summer on this section.